Welcome all in for Tuesday, October 27th, 2020, where two laypersons, a pastor and an academician, gather for about 55 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is November 1st. Each Tuesday we call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And for our friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, that's 5:30 a.m. Our little team is working to be faithful to Lectionary Year A. We hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. We develop perspectives independently, and then we share, encourage, and challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Bill Hall.
Sarah Mickelson.
Charles Willard.
And I'm Don Upton. And I'll read the Gospel Lectionary this morning from the New Revised Standard Version. And I'll be reading from Matthew 23, 1 through 12. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore do whatever they teach you and follow it. But do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have the place of honor at banquets and the best seats in synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted." And that's the word of the Lord. Well, I've got three questions to work through today, and I just want to say for folks that are listening or watching that we put these questions together not just to help us work together on answering questions and starting a conversation, but if you're leading a discussion group or a Sunday school class, that you may find these questions helpful as well. But to kick things off, and speaking of the seat of Moses, here's Charles Willard.
Thank you, Don. I wanted to bring to the attention of those listening the work of a scholar whose name is Mark Allen Powell, who examined a question of what is the seat of Moses. The problem is that we have no clue in the text. This is the only place where that phrase occurs, and so we're left with a mystery as to what it might have meant or what it was, but his observation was that it was sufficiently. This is the only place, for example, where that occurs in Matthew or anywhere else in the Gospels or the New Testament. And so we are only left with speculation as to what the seat of Moses might have been. And scholars, of course, like to speculate. And so there's been a lot of that. And the closest that they have come is to imagine that the seat of Moses was literally a seat where the reader, the priest, or the rabbi sat, and what happened at that point was that the Torah was read to those in attendance. The implications of that in this particular passage change the way that we understand what Jesus was saying, and the puzzle as to why would Jesus commend the rabbis at this point. Why would he commend them when the rest of the gospel is strewn with very negative comments about them, including this text itself? Powell's interpretation, after looking at multiple attempts to explain why this apparent conflict and Jesus' thought about the rabbis came up was, I think, brilliant. And it was that what Jesus was commending the disciples to listen to was their quoting of the Torah, period. Not their explanation of what it meant, not their explanation of what people were supposed to do on the basis of that, not their own interpretation, which Jesus continues to criticize in this passage and elsewhere. But what Jesus is saying in effect here is that you can listen to as he puts it here, the scribes and the Pharisees, when they are speaking the words, the literal words from the written text of the Torah, the law. Beyond that, they goof it up. And that is parallel to the rest of Jesus' interactions with the scribes and the Pharisees and resolves the problem. It's a resolution that I think commends itself because it allows us to not think that Matthew somehow got off track here or that Jesus somehow changed his mind in the middle of things and then changed it back, but was consistent throughout. And I was pleased with that, and I offer that for your consideration.
Thank you, Charles.
Oh, I want to say one other thing. We're not helped in this. We're not helped in this by our translation. For those of you who don't read Greek, in verse 3, the translation is, do whatever they teach. And later on in that same verse it ends, they do not practice what they preach, what they teach. The Greek word, which has been translated by the NRSV here as teach, is not the word that usually is used for teach. This word is the one that usually is used for say. I say something. I speak it. But by not translating it that way, by translating it what the translators of the NRSV here have done, have loaded the way in which non-Greek readers are going to understand that text. They're going to take it as in teach, as in I can read it and now I can teach about it. That's not what the text says. What the text says is the scribes and Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, therefore do whatever they speak, whatever they, in effect, say, quote from the Torah, you follow it. But they do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they quote. Would be a better way of twisting the simple word lego, which means I speak.
Thanks. And speaking of speaking, first question, heads up, Bill, coming at you. The failure to walk the talk can be, at least today, is an assault on credibility or standing of teachers or leaders in the 21st century. And if we are to take Jesus seriously about following the teaching, following the speaking, despite bad behaviors, are there applications to and guidance for life today? Bill Hull, would you kick this off, please?
Thank you. Good morning, team members and others tuning in later. A couple of general comments and then focusing on your question. We are approaching the end. Jesus is moving toward Jerusalem and things will turn out as we are familiar. And I'm reminded that in Matthew 10, Jesus calls the disciples and gives them what I might describe as logistical instructions. Travel lightly. A number of instructions, and you're going to face opposition. Don't worry about it. The Spirit will be with you. To me, from one perspective, Jesus is pausing again, because I believe this is clearly focused on the disciples. And he's tried to prepare them that he's going to leave. And now I think Jesus is coming back to the style of Matthew 10 in the sense of what is the substance of what you are to do, because even though they didn't want to believe it, he's going to leave them earthly, and they are going to be left to guide and shape the church. And to me, in the midst of the negative comments about the then religious leaders, there's the positive message of what is to be your style as you seek to be leaders. And it's, Don, you and I in other conversations have talked about leadership and biblical leadership. And in one sense, he's saying, you could almost interpret it as nobody's a leader. There always have to be leaders, but I think the healthiest leaders are those who equip, which is another concept elsewhere in the New Testament, the equipping of the saints. It's like I go to my doctor. My doctor is a leader, but we're a team. That's how we operate. That's one of my criteria for selecting a physician. Is this someone who sees himself or herself as a team member with me? He or she has some very special knowledge, but it's my body, and I want a voice in how we try to enrich that. And so I think that's important to understand, that Jesus is offering us, I would say, some very critical information about the style with which we minister. It's interesting now to your question about walking the talk. Peterson in the Message titles this section Religious Fashion Shows. Religious fashion shows. And he ends it in his translation paraphrase. They talk a good line, but they don't live it. They don't take it into their hearts and live it out in their behavior. It's all spit and polish veneer. That idea of veneer, the appearance of something. And Sharon Renge, in her commentary on this, notes for us, and it gets back, Charles, I think, to what you were emphasizing, which is very helpful. They were quoting the Torah. Jesus acknowledges they're speaking the truth. And as Sharon Renge says, these Pharisees, whatever you think of them, they weren't saying that the Torah permits theft, murder, or any of these other immoral activities. But she suggests that what they're missing is that it really is about justice. The issue is justice, and they're getting caught up in all these appearances. And then Caroline Lewis, whom I often find helpful, says that in her view, what Jesus is doing here is, to use her term, relanguaging the Beatitudes. He's putting the Beatitudes in yet another framework. And I like that. I had not thought about that before. You know, taking something he said in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and in effect bringing it forward into this conversation. And she says the behavior of the scribes and Pharisees is what anti-beatitude living looks like. Wow. And so, again, I bring it to me. I think ultimately the best use of this scripture or any scripture is, what is it saying to me? And I think the truth is all of us miss the mark. All of us are less than totally congruent between talk and walk. And yet I believe the gospel is, with God's help and our effort, we can narrow the gap. We don't do this, but I think we can narrow the gap. And hopefully that's what this podcast is about, and all that we do is encouraging us to move closer to the Spirit of Christ.
Thank you. How about you, Sarah?
I think it's more than that, but I'm going to add to what Bill said and say yes and. I think that the Pharisees might sit down, or whoever's being observed in this particular conversation, they might sit down and go, I'm not a real doctor, but I play one on TV. And I can tell you that real doctors would prescribe Phillips milk of magnesia or whatever the product is. So they have hijacked the trustworthiness, hijacked the education, the learning, the commitment to play a doctor on TV to recommend a product. And I think that's the insidiousness of this, is it's religion as a brand versus faith as a practice. Piety as performance. So, and the behavior that they're acting or using is to build their own self-worth up, to build their own position in the community, to build up their, you can trust me because I'm a good brand spokesman. Sham wow. So it's marketing versus authentic testimony that can speak to specifically the benefits of faithful practice. So my question is, does sitting on a throne and wearing a crown make one noble? No. So I think Jesus is drawing our eye to the temptations that come with respectability and the temptations that come with authority and the temptations and corruptions, if you will, that come with being looked to for interpretation and faithful lives and faithful practice. If you can't, it's going to be difficult to see and to measure how authentic the role model is if all you're looking for is a role model. And I think that is the challenge here, that we're looking for leadership that acts faithfully, not speaks faithfully. It'd be great if they did both, but I think more often than not, our observation of practical behavior is going to be a more truthful interpretation than what somebody says. So I might be a doctor on TV, but that doesn't mean I have any medical knowledge, period. I might have visited a lot of doctors and have a lot of opinions, but that doesn't make me a doctor. The doctor's innate, intrinsic drive is to care for the patient, not to be told, man, you look good in a white coat. Oh, I like your stethoscope. You're well appointed. You've dressed the part. And I think that's part of the challenge with this, is that we're told not to dress the part because it's all about building up the self. And as we'll discover later, that's not the model Jesus is using. I rest my case.
You said you began with yes and?
Yeah.
Is that right? So I'll go, yes, but even if there is selfish behavior, self-aggrandizement, even if there's bad behavior, the word prevails. And I think there's a real promise in here, too, just a fundamental promise. When I first read this, the reason I asked about 21st century is my read on using this language in the 21st century is it destroys everything. When you say someone doesn't walk the talk, then the point of saying that is they're hypocrites. You destroy both sides. You destroy the message and you destroy the behavior. right? You say that in America to say, this is not the person you think they are. Can you trust them? No. Are they authentic? No. Do they follow through on what they say? No. Are they committed? Are they truthful? No. So it destroys, at least in my experience, that's why you say that. This is not that. Right. I can hear, when Charles always says, be careful about, can you actually see into the first century? And I think this one's really distortive of looking at the first century because it's destroying character. And now I'm reading it going, I don't think that's what Jesus is trying to do at all. Jesus is giving us assurance that these leaders, insert any leader that purports to seek the truth, to seek the Creator, to understand the promise, those seekers are connected. Those seekers have found the truth. And so it's a flip of the American read. If you have bad behavior, you do not walk the speak, Charles. The speak lives. And he's not trying to destroy these people. He's trying to make it clear that this prevails. I think maybe it's like last week we talked about Jesus going at interpretations. For instance, all right, you have an idea of who the Messiah is going to be. You say it's the son of David. David calls him Lord. How can that be? And I called it Jenga. You pull that out, and what's going to happen? Your whole concept of God's promise is going to collapse? No, not at all. It hovers in the air. But I think there's a really sweet assurance in this, that the seekers, the people that are dedicated to learning and understanding God's history, find it. And it cannot be wiped out. Things may pass. The earth may change. Nations may rise and fall. You may not walk the talk, but the word of the Lord prevails. How about you, Charles? Any thoughts on this before we move to the next question?
Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sarah, the next one's for you. What are we learning from Matthew about the meaning of humility?
It's not about me. It's not about you. So I looked up the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition. Having or showing a modest or low estimate of one's self-importance. So maybe it falls back into the priority. What takes priority for the listener? Is it their own appearance, their own position, their own place of accountability, authority, posture, power, or does it have to do with their pursuit of something that's more important than themselves? And, this is a really tricky bit because it talks about, I think, Jesus seeing into the hearts of people where humanity doesn't necessarily have that gift. We sometimes catch a glimpse of what seems to be at the heart of someone's decision-making or at the heart of someone's choices. And I agree with you, Bill. I think we all are in shades of gray on this one, that on good days we are moving closer to God's purposes and God's pursuits and God's actions that we could take. On bad days, we are the toddler who wants what they want, and we don't want to wait, and we need it now, and we want what we want, and we want to take action. I'm proverbially the water boy on the side of the football field going, Coach, give me the ball, I'm happy to run, And so I think the challenge before us is that same challenge of knowing when you're stepping over your boundary of, is it about me or is it about Christ? Is it about me or is it about following the faithful practice of one who shows us the model to follow? And am I leading? No. Am I following? Yes. So it's that purpose and that action that relays or shows others our humility, our willingness to take a second seat or the back seat or the one over the wheels or whatever the conversation needs to be. I think that's one of the challenges we all face, is proverbially looking to Christ as the model to follow instead of bravely and brazenly walking up and going, oh, I know how to solve that problem. So humble being an adjective, humility being a noun, both focused on a low estimate of one's own self-importance.
Thank you. I was thinking about, in terms of Matthew, where humility plays in with the confrontations and there's so much dialogue going on. And I'm just going to connect it to one thing, which is the humility of change and listening. I can be very secure in my confidence. I think I get it right. And I don't know of a gospel more than Matthew where I've gotten it wrong. You know, we talked a few weeks ago about give to Caesar what is Caesar's. I've misread that, in my opinion, for many years, and it was like upsetting the apple cart when I took another look at it. So in Matthew, I think some of the lessons for me have been humility is looking at these challenges that Jesus is laying up. Jesus actually saying, I think many times, it's okay to talk about this. It's okay to upset the apple cart. Don't be afraid of that. But it requires humility, especially if you have a sense of power. If like last week, we have people who are protecting information going, we already have the answers. Let's see if you have the right answer. It takes a great deal of humility. If you wear the robes, if you have the title, if it gives you assurance. And so I think there's something here for everybody that, you know, I think I'm going to have a better day when I think I have it figured out. And humility means no. Humility means the willingness to change, a willingness to listen, a willingness to accept others' opinions, a willingness to go and listen in places where you normally would never go before. And I think that goes through Matthew especially. How about you, Bill Holt?
I will springboard from what I heard you saying. Listening to you helped me remember I meant to do something before this morning that I didn't do, which was reread Matthew and find out how many times literally or in effect this message is repeated in Matthew. We're springboarding on the last verse of today's passage. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. That reversal of human expectations, I think, is a recurring theme in the gospel. It'd be also interesting to look at the other three gospels and how, again, literally or in effect, this message is repeated. I think that's at the heart of the gospel, that, first of all, the whole idea of unconditional grace is not human expectation. That's not what our human societies are built on. And anyway, this is a recurring theme that, again, signals to us how critically important this is. The last shall be first and the last first. And it has to do with what you do to the least of these. Matthew 25. It's not about rubbing shoulders with the high and mighty. It's about standing alongside of, working with the least of these. And of course, the scripture that comes to mind is obvious, which is the Philippians 2 passage. Let this mind be in you, which was in Christ Jesus, who humbled himself and took on the form of a servant, and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. That's, in a sense, the ultimate kind of being humbled. And human history teaches us that tendency to crucify the one who most represents the essence of the message. We think of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others whose talk and walk were at least fairly congruent. So I think it again represents the grace of God, but how deeply challenging it is to live out that grace, to believe that, in the words of our founding as a nation, all people are created equal. It'd be hard to believe that's our mantra today, given the inequalities that exist, but it is still the goal, the North Star that we are to follow. And humility, at this point, we've made this point before and others have. Humility doesn't mean total self-abasement. It doesn't mean I'm dirt, please walk on me. We are to love ourselves. We are to see ourselves as loved of God, but not so that we can lord it over others, but that we can better, in the words of Stephen Covey's fifth habit, seek first to understand, then to be understood. That to me is a powerful expression of humility. To be understood, I am also a person of value, and I'd like you to understand me, but I'm going to begin by seeking to understand you.
Thanks, Bill. Before we get to the next question, Charles Willard, anything from you? Thank you. All right, final question. Is the greatest as servant is well known to gospel readers, but how would you explain this concept of great to a newcomer to Matthew in 2020? And I didn't write that one out because I have the answer. I struggled with it. So I thought I would turn to my friends to see what they thought. And Bill Holt, could you go first, please?
I will give it a try. This whole issue of servant leadership is a term we use nowadays. And there's always the risk of using the latest catchphrase, the kind of being in with it. But I think in its essence, that concept of servant leadership is so powerful today, and I think seldom expressed, or at least in terms of what catches the news media. What the news media focuses on is power dynamics and who can out-debate the other and who can put the other down with the latest demeaning label. And your question is, how would I explain this concept of great to a newcomer to Matthew in 2020? I think some clues are, Jesus in verse 8 says, you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. Mark Davis reminds us, literally, students, the word is brothers, and we would say today brothers and sisters. That to me means the ground is level. In the Message, Peterson says, you are all classmates. I like that. Again, we're all sitting together in the classroom. And then from my favorite book of the New Testament, James chapter 3, he says, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. I resonate with what I think is the tone of that there are teachers, there are people who lead us, there are people who know more than we do on a subject, but ultimately the ground is level, and greatness comes not from power dynamics, but from the ability, again, to seek to understand each other. And another favorite passage of mine is from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. We were gentle among you like a nurse tenderly caring for her children. So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. We work day and night so that we might not be a burden to any of you. Again, that tone, that spirit of gentleness, of willingness to stand with someone. I will do my part. I hope you will do your part. It creates an attitude that shapes greatness, I think, Don, in a way that is still alien. I think in many ways we are the first century. This issue of power, dominance, of in the words, putting heavy burdens, wanting to be seen, wanting a place of honor, to be greeted with respect, to be called something, in this case, rabbi, whatever favorite title you want to insert. That's all about ego. And I think at the heart of however we want to understand sin is the issue of ego. Is it about me, or is it about doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with God?
Thanks. I'm wondering if I went through and did a survey of Scripture, if I saw something I viewed as great or was described as great in the language of the day for a human being, it always creates conflict with the Creator. That you attach greatness or you to yourself or to someone else. You give the greatness. You cede power to them. That what's next is conflict with God. You could do that with David. You could do that all through the Old Testament. You could do it in the Gospels. And I think Matthew especially is counsel to that. You know, what are you thinking? What answers do you think you have that you're holding behind your back that you're testing me with here? Is that greatness? And Matthew seems to just go at that over and over again. You know, there you are standing there asking me questions. There you are proclaiming. There you are walking about in your robes. Is that greatness? And what does greatness actually look like? Well, God is great. What is this? So I think there's an idolatry piece that's unspoken. I think there's always conflict. There's reconciliation, but there's always great conflict and great loss. Another thing I was thinking about as I went through Matthew was explaining it in the 21st century is I just thought it was difficult. That's why I threw it out. Just very difficult. And I was thinking, why is this so hard? And I think it's hard because I was making a mistake. That I was thinking that being a servant and that greatness is in service means that it's invisible. And I think the 21st century American might think that way too, that service is diminishment. And that's not quite it, that service is invisibility, that service is microscopic, that service is small. And so I got caught up in that 21st century reading too, because I don't think that's what it says. It's look at this service with new eyes. Look at it with the Creator's eyes and what it really means. It may be that we diminish ourselves, and that's a healthy thing to do. The service that I see in Matthew especially is seen. And if it's not seen, it's called out. Our responsibility, Jesus calls it out. Look, the whole gospel is Jesus says, look at what she is doing. Look at this. Look, look, look. So it's not really invisible, and it's part of the community's ecosystem. And if Jesus is saying, don't do as they speak, don't do as they do, but do as the things that they speak, it's a reminder that God is present and truth is right there, tip of our fingers all the time, no matter what we do. And that if it's not diminished and the greatness is in the work, I think it's a nice reminder that the essentials of the business of life, that allow us to do what we do, care for each other, go about our business, create wealth, whatever it is we're going to do today, wasn't based on things that we see as great, but the essentials. I need nourishment. I need to be clean. I need to have shoes. I need fundamentals. And I think the connection of service, and Jesus says that over and over, especially in the washing of feet throughout the Gospels, that there's that fundamental platform. Not invisible. It is the platform on which we do our business. It's the platform on which we live our Christian lives. I can't go out the door today unless I have something to wear. And somebody might have done that for me. So I'm kind of rethinking it. And I was reminded, Sarah, of a lyric that I've mentioned before that I love very much from an older band called the Judy Bats. And the song is called Being Simple. And the chorus, just when I talk about these, comes back to me. And one of the parts of the song is, I want to be great, but greatness is giving. Giving leaves me empty. Oh, great emptiness. Sarah, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I started with this idea that there's this incredible vulnerability that we're walking toward, if you will, moving from the study of Matthew into Advent. And this comforting, frightening moment of becoming a new parent. And you are so excited that this is a miracle that's about to occur to you. And in the same framework, you're like, well, how can I hurt the miracle? There are 1,000 things that parents worry about and are concerned for and read and read and read in an effort to be prepared for the infant that you're going to bring home. And if you don't start from a loving perspective and you look at only, here's what's required of you, there's this disconnect between parent and child. If you see the child as only a vehicle for procreation or, a conversation about my lineage and a conversation about who will carry on after me, you miss the love. There's a certain level of profound paradoxical vulnerability that God would give us his son in infant form, and that we would grow to learn how to follow that. So I always find it striking that ultimate power chooses the most vulnerable expression of humanity to start the conversation. So I think that's the most profound example of greatest to servant, to arrive with not the ability of not being able to do anything and depend wholly on the parent. Talks a little bit about how God wants us to get to know him. And I think there's something else that's lovely about, you look at a lot of the conversation of servant leadership comes out of Isaiah. And this richness of language that talks about what it looks like to love others as much as self. And I think that's where we find this particular passage is, what does it look like when it's not about loving neighbor as self? From last week's conversation about the greatest commandment to this, if you truly love your neighbor as yourself, you're going to want them to succeed. You're going to want them to have what they need. You're going to want to assist and be supportive and find methods, structures, practices that enrich the whole instead of individuals that are part of the show. I think that's one of the things that's really difficult. And I think that we all feel that friction about, is it about me or is it about making somebody else's life better? And, you know, I often play this game of, can you do something nice for somebody without them knowing? And if you can, do it again. And keep doing it until you're caught. Or keep doing it until you can't be caught, which is even better. I think that's what Jesus would have us do. So it can be as simple as, I know that she's going to need that shirt at work tomorrow and she hasn't washed it yet, so I'm going to wash it. It can be as simple as, every animal meets me at the gate and says, Mom, I'm so glad you're home. Can we have dinner now? So it's the sense of, can you feel the need that others bring to you? And if you can't, there's a problem with perception. If you expect all the animals to come to the gate and pay homage to you because you are the feeder, then that's really not what this is about. And I think for me, it's where does the intrinsic start find its roots? Is it in self-aggrandizement and making yourself look better, or is it in legitimately looking at the needs of others and moving toward them? And I think the book of Matthew is really good at saying, as Donnie, is it your uncle or your dad? Your dad used to turn your head and go, Donnie, look over here. I love that. So that's my take on greatest as servant.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sitting in Charlotte today at a hotel room, and as you were talking, I'm just looking out my window here, and the sun's coming up, and it's fairly urban, and people are going to work. And I was challenging myself because you inspired me, Sarah, and I was looking out going, well, you know, if you really look out there and think about even folks in their cars, maybe on their phones, connecting with their families, making sure things get done, I can't see any of this actually functioning without humble service. It's really everywhere. You know, there's rules and structures and this hotel I'm staying in today, but those processes are in place. But it's not really going to work without people that are committed. I don't mean corporate service. I mean the heart, the service heart, that it's really everywhere. I was kind of going through an exercise that made me very happy, that the infrastructure of the world wasn't really based on power. It was based on people in their hearts nurturing each other.
Yeah.
I can see it. Window. I can put myself inside every car that's passing right now, and I know most of it is people thinking about and preparing to help each other. Well, Charles, we're about to wrap up. Let me go to you to see if you have any final comments.
Yes, I do. I think this has been one of the most enriching and most inspiring conversations we've had, and I want to thank all three of you for contributing that to my life today, which is much in need of it. So thank you very much, and my expectation and anticipation and intention is that those who happen to have the good fortune to listen to these conversations take away and gain the same uplift and inspiration that I have this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks for being here. I had a lot of comments this week about you, Charles. There are listeners in many states and many places, and you are appreciated. And for those of you listening in, we're wrapping up the lectionary year very soon. I think, Sarah, you touched on that. Advent's not far away. So I just want to make a note that we're about to turn the page and more time in another gospel. We're in lectionary year A. We're about to go to lectionary year B. And we'll mark that in our conversations going forward. Also, if you're watching or listening during the time of pandemic, I want to let you know that Palmacia Presbyterian Church at 3501 West San Jose in Tampa, Florida, has other resources for you. So if you go to palmacia.org, that's PALMACEIA.org, there are other discussions about this lectionary, sermons, reflections, prayers, outstanding music. So if you're listening this time, want to Want to continue this in terms of worship and reflection, we commend that site to you as well. And you're always welcome. And we'll see you next time.